If you read anything, you guys are in for a treat. This is my first live demo. I did one for the MPG a couple years ago by video where you can edit, which was great. I can't edit live, so this will be interesting. But as Mark said, I want to show you basically how I go about making these things. Orbs, balls, spheres, paperweights. Some people say, oh, they're paperweights. I use strictly for the wood pieces of Australian burl. One of the reasons I use the Aussie burls, you don't have to stabilize them. There's such a hard, dense wood already that I don't want to have to go through another step of stabilizing and all that. It's me. I just don't want to go through all that. And there's other woods you can get away with not stabilizing. I know walnuts and one, there's a few others. But generally, you need that wood to be 1,000, not 100, 1,000% dry and stable. So if you're taking other burls, some suspect burls, or even other woods that are a little bit punky or whatever, if you're going to use it for wood turn, you need to stabilize it first before you cast it with, I use acrylic resin, and it's the Alumilite Clear Slow. I forgot the bottles of it at home, but anyway. There's several different types that they have, several different brands. They use Alumilite Clear Slow. It has they say a 12-minute working time. That's more of a guideline. I've gone way over before and not have a problem with it starting to already start cure before it goes into our pressure pot, which I'll get to in a minute. So I do like the fact that you can do deeper pours with the Clear Slow, and you can kind of take your time. You're not rushed. I know they've got one that I think John Underhill did in September. He talked about using like a 2-minute cure time, so he had to move pretty quick, but he does smaller castings than I do, so this works for me. And if you saw them anywhere, the reason I also use the Aussie burls is if you took a look at these before the meeting, the Aussie burls are known for, on the natural side of things, for all their little spikes, let's call them that. And when you put them into the acrylic and turn them, they really get magnified, and there's what draws people into my booth at art shows. They see these things from a mile away, like, oh my gosh, that looks like an undersea, scene, or a top of the mountains, or whatever.
Is it okay?
Oh yeah, please pass it around. These are mainly the colors I do. I do 5 different colors on them. I don't have I get the yellow and this color. Yeah, anyway, just a side note, I did bring a couple of my boxes that I do. These are done out of the same molds that I create the orbs from, but instead of using the Alumilite dyes, which is the transparent for the orbs, these are using Alumilite powders, the micro powders and all that. So it's just something else I do with the same process, same turning, but it's just instead of working, with an orb, you make something a little more functional out of things. So this was done with yellow and red. I got one with the green, purple, and white. So it's just another thing you can do out of the same molds, which I'll show you in a second, if you're tired of working orbs. And I have a little bit of an ADD issue, so if I turn more than 2 orbs in a day, I have to do something else. Question?
I noticed on this one there's like streaks look like gold or blue. Is that something you put on there?
No. That was a happenstance of pure coincidence from the first time I ever molded one of these and it came out. I was trying to figure out what happened. I didn't know something go wrong, but it doesn't affect it. I don't know what causes it. I still haven't figured it out. I asked John Underhill, who's the casting genius. He has no idea. He couldn't figure it out. It's not, we thought maybe moisture, but it's not moisture. I don't know how it happens. Sometimes it's in all of them. Sometimes I've turned, well, there's nothing in there. It's actually part of the lure, because that's when they take them out when they're at a show. I'll have them taken out of the sunshine, and it's like a whole new world to them. And so that my pitch to it is put it in the sunny window of the house, and it just kind of reflects on all that little, valleys and things, the rivers I call them. Yes?
I'm just now starting to run the resin bit, and I'm having issues with white crusty stuff around some of the wood I do. Is that too much moisture in the wood?
Probably, yeah.
'Cause
I mean,
got it to like 2%.
what kind of wood are you using?
Anything I can put in there. I
Um,
get snow saves that I'm gonna make the coasters with, and I stack it in
Repeat the question.
in a bowl, and it's through, right? 60.
okay, yeah, I'll repeat the question for the camera. So he's asking about he's been finding when he's doing the casting stuff, and so getting some white foam or white crust, you said, kind of on the edges and things of the thing. More than likely it is moisture. And it's very few woods that I have found that you can get away with not drying or that you don't stabilize. So for the most part, me personally, if I was doing any other kind of wood other than the Aussie wood, I would probably go through the stabilizing, which will involve the drying when you stabilize.
That's what I did.
And it still happens?
One of the things that you get into when you have casting and you're doing any kind of casting, for me personally, and I don't want to take away from you, is when I get whiting and I'm using a Lumalite, more times than not, it's when I was mixing it that I didn't mix it all the way through. And I know you think you mix it all the way through, but you just keep mixing it, mixing it, mixing it. Because whiting for me is that the B side didn't get mixed into that A side well, and there was too much B. So if you don't mix it or you use too much B, you're always going to get white.
The other thing about what I was going to get into next is using Alumalite, at least is the one, there's different brands out there that do it by different methods, whether it's by ratio, weight, or whatever. Alumalite, there's slow works by weight. It's a part A, part B. So when you normally get a kit from Alumalite, you get a gallon of part A, a gallon of part B, and you mix it. So you want to have a scale that measures, I suggested grams, and you want to get it exactly the same. In the part A, part B, 2 separate cups before you mix. And then when you pour it in, so what I'll usually do is after I poured it in, I use either cups like this, one for part A, one for part B, or you can even, if you got a smaller amount, you can go get the solo cups. And again, mark them part A, part B, so you're not confused which one is which. And the key, like Mark was talking, is you have to make sure not only they're exactly the same amount of weight for each one, but when you mix them, you're stirring like there's no tomorrow. You've got to make sure that it's right. So I talked about the 12-minute open time or working time for the slow, which they said you can go a little over, but I'll probably spend 3 or 4 minutes stirring. I mean, I'm stirring, I'm scraping the bottom of the cup, I'm scraping the sides, and I'm stirring. That's even before I add my dye. I want to make sure that that's stuff. If you're using a mixing paddle on your drill, obviously it goes a lot quicker. You won't have a problem, but again, you want to make sure you're scraping sides, scraping bottom to get all of that. Getting back to how much you would use in your casting, you have to figure out, these are the molds I use. These are by Lizard Blanks, they're out in Oregon. The reason I use these is I've got one now that I've probably have gone through 50 to 60 molds with one mold so far. This is a brand new one I just bought. But you can use them over and over and over. It's the HDPE stuff that they make. I mean, they're expensive to start with, but it's high quality, and instead of making your own mold that you're going to do, I do 6 or 7 art shows a year. I usually take 7 or 8 of the orbs to every show. I sell them out at every show. So I got to go home and make more. To make a mold for each one, again, my ADD comes in, and I can't do that. It just takes too long. So these are a godsend for anybody who wants to go into it on a regular basis. And they have different sizes, different configurations. They will custom make them. They have them for pens. They have them for pepper mills. This is what they call a hybrid. It's a 4x4x4 hybrid mold. I also have one these actually that I brought came out of a 5x5x5 mold. It's just, to me, it's a game changer as far as time. So when I am doing this, getting them ready, first thing I'm going to do is I'll take the mold, I will put a piece of tape, and just a piece of duct tape or something. I put it in the center of the bottom. Reason being, I'm gonna spray the inside with a stuff called mold release. Now, even though HPP is usually non-stick, let's say with most resin, this helps it even more. So, but it won't, when you glue your wood in, I'm gonna tell you about it in a minute, if you didn't put the tape down to protect the bottom and you spray this in the bottom, the glue won't hold the piece of wood down. It'll float up to the top while it's in the pressure pot. You won't know until you pull it out of the pressure pot and you're like, oh shoot, that's going in the garbage. So, piece of tape in the bottom, I spray the whole mold with this. I don't do it, I'll do it almost every time. Not necessary, but that's me, it's a pet peeve. Then I will take the wood, I'll just take a hot glue gun, put a little bead on the bottom, I put it in the bottom of the mold. You wait a few minutes for the glue to dry. Then you get into your mixing. Now you gotta know, how much do I have to use? That's where the rice comes in. This is what I use. So I'll put the piece of wood in there, and I'll just put it loose to start with. I'll pour the rice in there until I get it level with the top. Once I have that, I pour then all the rice into one of these, and wherever it comes to, whatever amount it is, you get the ounces here, so if it comes up to 32 ounces, that's how much resin I need to fill up that space with the wood in it. So 32, but then you're gonna have a part A, part B, so 32, divide in half, you're going 16-16-ish, because it's by weight. Part B is slightly thicker and heavier viscosity than A, so you'll actually see when you get the 2 gallons, if you order it, part B is slightly less in the jug than part A because of the weight. It's all done by weight. So then that'll give you the idea, so then you start pouring it in, put cup A, and just start pouring it on, you know how much. These are 18 ounces. If I knew I needed 16, this is an 18-ounce cup. I'll do it a little bit short, so it always starts short. And then as you're going, to get your weight even, you can kind of just take a little squirt, because the bottles will actually come with a little plunger. You can do it micro dots of the stuff to get the weight just right. Mix it in there, stir it up, add your dye, pour it into the mold. Mold then goes into a pressure pot. There's a lot of different pressure pots out there, different sizes, but the key is your the PSI. Most of them don't tell you to go over 60 or 80 PSI on the pressure pot for safety reasons. Mine is a CA Technologies pressure pot, and it goes up to an 80. They don't say exceed 80 PSI. I do 55 pounds when I put it in. That's what it's set for. So I just drop it in there, turn it on, and 2 or 3 hours, I leave it in there, and it cures up. When it comes out, what's nice about these, sometimes I can do it without unscrewing the one panel. You just kind of pound it down on the thing, and it'll pop out. Sometimes they're a little bit ornery, sticky. Then I have to undo this section, which is fine. They tell you in the instructions when you buy it, you can take that off if you have to. Just a little tap, tap, and it comes out. And then you can just put this back together. When you are using dyes, at least Alumilite dyes, this stuff goes a long way. I'm talking, well, you've seen the 2 blue ones here. This one came out a little bit darker than I would have liked, unless it's really in the bright sun or a bright light. That's using like maybe half a pinhead of dye.
Could you hold that label?
Oh, sure. It's like using half a pinhead of dye on the end of a popsicle stick when I go to mix it up in there. You've got to be very careful with some of these, especially the darker colors. Purple, I'm notorious for just, a micro dot is all you need for that stuff to really become dark. So it takes a little bit of practice to know how much you're putting on. What I do is just dip it onto a popsicle stick, stir it up in there. And again, that's another time when I'm going to then be stirring like crazy to make sure that that dye is intermixed well and you don't get some cloudy look to it, because that happened before. If I didn't stir it enough, take it out of the pressure pot, out of the mold, you see kind of these wispy look, and you can see that the dye wasn't quite stirred up all the way. So you want to make sure you're stirring that well. Believe me, I'm not an expert on casting. This is what I learned. I actually started doing these orbs because of a video I saw by a gentleman named Heath Knuckles about 6 years ago on YouTube. And I was having these pieces of Australian burl that I didn't know what to do with. They were left over from my bowl turner with them. They were chunks that I would cut off with the bandsaw. It's like, what is it? The Aussie burls are not cheap. So I was like, I gotta be able to do something with this. And I saw his video, he's doing an orb with acrylic resin. I said, aha, there we go. And that's what started all this. That's another reason why I only use the Aussie burls too. He was actually using one. He made a suggestion, if you don't want to stabilize, use the Aussies. And that's what I do. I like returning Aussies anyway if anybody's seen my bowls. Okay, so with that, now this is what will come out of the mold. Just a nice big block. Next thing I will do to it is, before on the bottom, it had a piece of glue, the smashed glue on there and some resin, because some resin would have snuck under there in the mold. I like to take that sliver on my bandsaw off. I've got a thing about, I don't know how well the epoxy that I'll glue my waste block with would attach to that piece of glue and everything else. So I take this, it's maybe a 1/16 of an inch at the most. I'll cut off the bottom just to get to bare wood. Next thing I will do to this is, and you can kind of, I don't know if you can see it here or not, on the bottom, I then mark with a center finder the center.
Put it right above the
Oh, there we, this one? Okay. Is it, can you see it?
Can you look at the monitor in front of you?
I can't see anything in the monitor in front of me. I can see the screen over there.
Yeah, the monitors should have.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, all right, it's maybe hard to pick up, but it's, so I found the center with a center finder. I use a center punch to make that little indentation in there. And then I take my compass and I just make a circle around the perimeter there. That's gonna be at least what I'll start with when I start turning this stuff. It kind of gives me a guideline, because then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this through my bandsaw at 45-degree angles, and I'm gonna knock off the corners. Because I have turned them as a block like this, just started turning this, it beats you up with your instrument, your hands, and everything else, trying to get all these corners knocked off. So I'm just cutting off the corners as if you were to take, you can probably take it round on the bandsaw if you want, but I just knocked off the corners at a 45 with this, and that's what would create that look. And then from there, when I'm going to glue my glue block or my waste block on the bottom, just a big chunk of wood to use for a waste block. And that hole is for a reason, and that little center punch for a reason. So when I'm using the 5-minute epoxy from the hardware store, is all I use. I squeeze some into a Dixie cup, stir it up, put it on the glue block. I use this, so I'll take the glue block, take it down in there, and then when I find that center, then I get the glue. So it's almost going to be centered on here to start with. If I try to eyeball that, I'm sure I'm going to be way off. You'll see it when you start turning, and now you're probably going to wind up with quite a bit smaller of an orb. So this is what I wind up with when it's all said and done to get ready to turn. So with this, finally, does anybody have any questions on what little casting I can tell you about? John Underhill's the genius on casting. I just, between listening to him and watching YouTube, that's how I learned how to deal with the casting and stuff. Probably the big thing about casting is there's a little investment into it all. I know cost-wise, Aluminite Clear Slow, they call it a 16-pound kit. It's a gallon of the part A, gallon of the part B. Right now, I think it's $193. But I get, I figured it out. I can get somewhere around 7 to 8 of the small bores out of the 4x4x4 out of that kit, and I can get 5 to 6 of the large out of that kit. So if you want it, that's if you're, again, I make these. They're fun to make, but I do sell them. So when I figure out what I got to charge at art shows for them, And if anybody's interested, the small ones I charge $155, and the large ones I charge $195. So that's what it, get into the cost involved with, but the Aussie burls are, I'll say it used to be, I'll say nothing because they were scrap pieces from some of the cutoffs from my bowls. I didn't know how popular these things were going to be when I started turning these like 4 years ago. So now when I'm on the website, which is australianburls.com, he's an importer of strictly Aussie burls out in, he's located in Virginia. He gets like 3 shipments a year. So you can get on his website. I go on his website now and I start looking for some of the smaller burl, you know, let's say that size, maybe 3-4 inches high. And I'll actually buy those, some of those strictly because it may not be deep enough to do a bowl out of, especially if they have some high spikes, for using on burl, or on the orbs. You know, one piece, let's see, this big, it might run me $110, $120 to buy from him, but if I can get, you know, 5 of the large orbs out of there at almost $200 as far as a sale, it's, to me, it's worth it. So I actually started buying some of the Aussie burls for this that way. But you can certainly do cutoffs, and again, you can do it too with it. You know, just go through the stabilizing if you use other types of burls or even other types of wood. Just be sure they're dry. Okay, so with this, as I get it mounted, even though I trust that glue to a point, so what I like to do is just put a little stability on here, but I don't like to put that point into the top, even though it can get turned away. So what I do is I just put a little shelf liner with a little block of wood and bring it up. And just make sure it's all turning nice. I just tighten it up. So it gives me a little extra, especially the vibration, and I start getting into the turning. One thing about resin turning, if you haven't watched it, you haven't tried it, it's messy. It is extremely dusty, messy. I would normally also wear my respirator, but with this, I don't know if I can put this on with. You can hear me okay? How about that? Well, I'll try to maybe not talk as much and lift it up when I can, but anyway, I wear a respirator. This is extremely messy. My wife thinks it's snowing when she opens up my shop door and sees me working on it. Tools I use. You can use other tools if you'd like. They're just, to me, more difficult to do with acrylic. If you're using standard, let's say bowl gouges, spindle gouges, that sort. I highly recommend the Easy Wood tools or any, I'll say that, any carbide tool, and go one step further with the carbide cutters, and I'd say go one step further and use the negative rake cutters with those. The negative rakes, I think, from what I understand, were created pretty much for this kind of turning, acrylic. It's almost foolproof as far as not getting any catches, anything else. You're scraping, yes, you're not cutting with a bowl gouge. So if anybody is not familiar with the negative rake, think of the flat top of a regular carbide cutter, which just has the single edge on it on the top. If you're familiar with a skew chisel, that's almost a form of a negative rake. It's got the bevel on both sides, top and bottom. So that's what these negative rake carbide cutters have, is the bevel on the top and bottom. It makes the cutting on acrylic so much easier. Yes, you can do it with a regular carbide, but you just have to be a little more gentle. If you do it with a normal spindle gouge, bowl gouge kind of thing, you've really got to take light cuts to the point where you'll probably double, unless you're not in a hurry, double your time just in the turning, because one, you can only work one direction, these you can work two. So this is why I use the Easy Wood tool with the negative rakes. So what I'm going to do now is just show you real quick. This is what I start. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to try to just get this thing trued up. All right, so just make a cylinder out of it. before I start getting into the shaping of it all. And to start out with, it gets a little bit, the first few cuts you'll probably hear pieces chipping off and hitting my face mask, but until we start getting more and more round, the first few cut, that's why I even cut the corners off, or it'd even be worse. I gotta remember how to use a jet now. There we go. So I never know what, I now have a robust American Beauty, which does not have a digital readout, so I never know how fast I'm turning. I just go by feel. But I know some guys are like their particular speeds, like right now, and the faster you can turn acrylic, the faster your speed, the smoother your cuts. So right now I'm about 17. And I'm just going to kind of get that into work. Dusty. So I was getting a little more aggressive than I normally would. That's where you can maybe see some of the tear out, because I'm really trying. It's one more for time, because Mark went a little long. Just saying. But normally I wouldn't have that. I mean, I'm usually just a little bit smoother. I'm just trying to get around. But this is the technique I'm doing. So I got a little more to go. You see the flats. So I would just keep going until all those flats would disappear. Turn up the speed a little bit now that I'm getting more round. This is about 22, 2300. I'll slow it down a little bit. This is more of the speed I would probably normally do it down. Sometimes you just kind of do that flip to see what's down, to get a little more steady, so it turns it on. The cuts now, we get more round and almost there. We get to so the ribbons get longer. Definitely have a good dust collection system besides the rest of the ribbons. Okay. All right, so no more flat areas. So this is where, well, we got this one here, but that'll actually, since it's on this part where it's going to start getting rounded for the orb, that'll disappear, so I'm not going to worry about trying to get rid of that. So at this point, usually what I will do is I will kind of start shaping the bottom first. Now, the bottom, there's a little bit of resin here we're going to go through, but since the bottom is almost always 90%, if not all, wood, this is the only time I do use a bowl gouge. You can continue with this if you want through there, but I found using a bowl gouge goes a little bit faster through that section. Just again, have to be, this is a half-inch finger 9/0 grind bowl gouge. And I just start working the bottom a little bit.
shatter with a bull gouge. They're thinking when they're on negative rate, they will sometimes shatter on you, but you can clean up with your negative rate. So pretty much that's what I'm just starting to get to that point with the bowl gouge. It'll go a little bit quicker than when I was scraping because you get a little more material.
Now that I've got this started, I'll go back to the negative rate, the carbide, and I'll start refining this just a little bit more before I start working on the top. And it's just a matter of just kind of going back and forth. My orbs, if you've kind of looked at them, and I said in the explanation in some of the newsletter and stuff, they're orb-ish. You can certainly go for a more perfect sphere if you like. There's different ways to do that. I know in September, I can't remember the gentleman's name who was doing the one little demo about how to do spheres. There's shadow methods with a card that's like a half moon, that you can do to shape it out. I actually started doing perfect spheres, let's call them, when I started this, and I would put them on a stand. And I actually bought a sphere jig from Carter Products, which mounts on the lathe, and it works the thing to get a perfect sphere. And the first show I ever took those to that were mounted on little pedestal stands that I made, people would barely bump into the shelf or something, and they'd fall off. I said, okay, I can't do this anymore. I got to figure out something else. That's when I started coming up with the idea of flattening the bottoms. So with them being perfectly round on the stand, you can kind of shift the wood different ways. Here, the wood's always at the bottom, but I haven't heard anybody complain about it. So that's why I decided it's just easier. I don't worry about these rolling off a stand or anything, whether it's at somebody's home or at the shows. So hence, they're not perfectly round, or I might, and I've actually told people if they were perfectly round, they feel like they came out of a circle mold or mold. And I like kind of the imperfection of it all. Whether it's in my bowls or anything else, I just, I don't want things to be perfect. So they're round, they look round, just don't roll it. It might wobble a little bit.
So just kind of working with your eye from about the center line down, just trying to get that curve. And realize that this will be the bottom where it's going to be flat, so we're not worried about obviously taking that down to this point. But you kind of, if you were going to kind of eyeball it down into the waist lot, you might take the angle to the side. Okay, then from there, now I start going over to the front. And I basically am doing the same thing, it just takes a little bit more because you're using the carbide. But what it's nice about the carbide, you can go both directions. So even though you're not taking a lot of material at each cut, as you would say with a bowl gouge, you can go both directions. It may look tedious, but it's just, time goes by quick. Rather than having to wipe the face off every 2 minutes. And once I start working towards the top, and this is another reason why I use that little wood plug or whatever you want to call it there in the front, because as you probably will, I'll show you when I take it off. It gets nicked here and there by my tool, and if I didn't have that, I was just using the end of the tool or the live center. I was doing up my cutting edge of my carbide metal on metal. So pretty much this is all you're doing to try to get it to the point of the shape that you think looks round. And then you're going to kind of, at the top, you're going to have to leave a little bit proud. Because once you remove the tip tailstock away, you gotta work the top end of your orb, and that's the material that get away. So that's essentially what you keep doing, and you like how round it is. Yeah, like I said, it's messy. This is where I take my air gun and give myself a nice little blow off here. Okay, so what I've got, and yes, I do wear a glove. You ever had some of the Aussie stuff come off at 2,000 RPM? It's hot. It's hot. So that's why I wear a glove. I know it's not the most safety thing in the world, but I've always tried with a glove. I'm just trying to be very careful. So this is why you kind of see how it's nicked up.
Hang on, hold on a second. Okay, there.
Yeah, so on the edges here, it's been kind of nicked up and turned on. And if I had this fitting was there and not this, I'm ruining a $20 carbide bit. So that's why I use this. So this is what it'll look like on the top once I get done. This one's I did at home, obviously. So the next part is when I put in the chuck, I'm gonna get the rest of the orb shaped up here. And then you probably see, I'll get in the chuck and show you. Sometimes where the wood meets the resin, doesn't happen all the time, maybe 50-50. I don't know if the camera will pick these up because these aren't too bad. There's these little pop marks, little voids that are in right where the wood meets it. I don't know why, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know why there'd be a little air pocket there. Who knows, but it does happen. What I do for those, and this is usually when I'm just about done with the turning, I'll do this first, I will usually get this done first. And the last thing I'm gonna do before I start sanding is I will fill those, and I won't fill, but CA glue with, because those are tiny holes, you pretty much, if you ever tried to cut a hole in there and not have to plug up on that thing, you need the ultra, the hot tips, or they call them pro tips, which are like the, almost like a needle type of thing that you'll cut, cut the end of it off, and it's just going to be an ultra fine hole. And from there, you would put that on the top, and you can just literally put a drop in there instead of having it kind of dribble out all over the place out of the main tip. You can drop it down in there, hit it with some accelerator. Sometimes if they're bigger, deeper ones, you might have to layer it. So put a little bit in, hit it with the accelerator, put a little more in, and even try to get it where it's fine. It runs out, no big deal, hit it with the accelerator. Because you're gonna finally, once you got them all filled, you'll take one or two more passes with your carbide on it, very light. You're just trying to get off whatever excess dried up CA is on there, and that fills those holes.
Are you using the thin CA or what are you using? Thin?
This is the thin. This is thin. I have probably maybe no more than a handful of times. I've seen some major craters, and I have used the medium just to fill it in a little better. But 99% of the time I'm using the thin. And make sure that after you've done it, you've hit the accelerator. Just because the accelerator, and they show you on the commercials and they talk about, oh, within a few seconds you're good to go. Not always. Because there's times where then all of a sudden I'll maybe wait 10, 15 seconds, take the tool and I'll do my first scrape, and I notice I'm getting a little flecks of CA on my tool rest, on my face mask, and it's like, okay, I didn't wait another 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever. So even though I'll hit the accelerator, I might wait another minute or two, just to make sure that it works its way down into the CA and under the layers and gets it. So that's how I fill those pock marks. Like I said, I don't know why. It's kind of like those shiny rivers, I'll call them, in the orbs. Why these are here, what causes them to be there. For some reason, it was an air pocket, I'm assuming. I don't know. You don't see them really until you get to the final turns. So what?
I wonder if we get a little bit of air out of the sapwood or the burl cap itself. I know you said you don't have to stabilize the Aussie burl wood, but would you be opposed to trying like coat a shellac over it before you pour the resin on it?
No, you could.
It might seal it, I'm saying. Maybe it's breathing.
Yeah, I mean, no, I haven't tried it. I've seen other guys on YouTube that do things like this, and they do sometimes will color the shellac and things and paint their burl sections and kind of seal it up.
You get a little bit of air in the pressure pot from the surface of the
Yeah.
burl itself.
Yeah, I always wonder too if I was, putting the air too fast into the pressure amount, maybe. I don't know. It's not like opening a pressure pot and saw all that stuff splattered or anything, but yeah, I mean, I never thought about putting the sealer on there, but I could try it.
If it doesn't bother the resin, it might not hurt to try it.
No, it shouldn't. Like I said, a lot of the guys that I see on YouTube doing stuff like this, they're sealing the burl part. Like what I leave natural and just pour the resin on top, they're actually sealing it up. Sometimes they're dyeing it, to make it.
I think the cap is as dense as the wood itself. Maybe
I don't.
Try for sure.
I don't know. Like I said, I've worked with a lot of burls, maple and walnut and all that kind of stuff. This Aussie burl is like a totally different animal as far as the characteristics, the feel, the way it turns. I tell people constantly, to me, it's like working with a piece of stone. It's not shavings. You get maybe some microchips, but it's dust. I don't mind turning. I actually don't really like turning the Aussie burls as far as the work goes, but I like what you get out of it, being so unique. So probably a bad thing to say, but 'cause I like all wood. So this is where then I'll just to work on the final shape. I'm going to take and just work this as best I can, to get my roundish. Sometimes it may look like the top of an apple, a little flat. It's like, it looks good to me, then I'll take it off the lathe and kind of look and say, oh, okay, this is a little bit too flat. Again, I prefer imperfect. So I kind of works to my eye, looks good, and I live with it. So this is just a little more finesse cutting to kind of get this to the point. You do want to work the easy wood tools, I think I forgot to say. Level on center. This cutter should be right on the center line, keeping it level. It's almost there. There's a little bit of a ridge there. So, and this is the, I refer to as the easy wood rougher, smaller tip. So for the final cuts, this is the easy wood finisher. Just a much bigger diameter cutter to it. Makes the cuts just a little bit finer. I actually use this in a lot of my, especially some of my deeper bowls, where it's hard for that transition because of the angle. To go from a fingernail grind to a traditional stuff. I actually find, and especially if you're doing kind of a back cut or an undercut rim, these work ideal to get in there. So I'll use these on my bowls too. But for this works a little bit less aggressive than that for the final cuts. And there I'm just kind of blending. Just about. That's good. And I'll take it through the whole thing. So if I had CA glue, this is where I would finally finish it off. There was residue on there. And for illustration purposes, that's about what I would get to. It'd be a little bit smoother than this. You can see a little bit of chatter on here, but so final cuts because I'm getting ready for sanding. So you've got this. It looks like it's a little bit bulbous here. I can live with that. It doesn't bother me. Because if I was to take this all the way down, if it was going to be round, to me, I can live with that. It's the imperfect thing that I look at. The last thing I'll do before I start my sanding is I'll take my parting tool down here where the waste block is, and I'm going to take this down, pretty much starting to get my flat bottom with this, but still leave enough to hold it while I do my sanding. I will turn it down when I'm doing this too, a little bit for the bottom. And what I'm going to do too, I like to undercut the bottom a little bit. And I'll take this back to this smaller bit and just, you see a little bit of a, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there's a little bit of a ridge there. I'm going to smooth it out. The rest of that can be done in the sanding once I part it off. So to me, this would be at the point where I'd start sanding. I mean, it'd look a little bit smoother than that, but for the demo purpose, because I'll finish this at home. My sanding, I will take dry sandpaper. Am I grayer than I was?
Yes.
So my method of sanding, I'll dry sand first, probably running about, I don't know, down here I guess it's going to be like 300. Yeah, probably this 750, but again, I just do it by feel. I'm not going to do all the sand, I'll just do a little breathing. This gets where it gets really dusty, so on my dry sand, I use nothing but the Abernac. If you ever used it, because of the holes, extracts dust, doesn't clog up the paper as much, and if it does, all you have to do, so all I'm doing is back and forth. This is what I start at 180. So just back and forth, trying to get anything noticeable ridges out, and you'll see it as it starts to turn into a white powder, and little ridges start to disappear if you had some that you couldn't feel or see, but sometimes the sandpaper will show them, and you'll start getting rid of them. So if I get a little here on the end, so you see how it's clogging up. My dust collector is usually right here. All I got to do is flick it, sometimes blow it out with a hose. It's like it's not even been used yet. If you did that with a paperback sandpaper, it clogs up a lot faster. The Abernac will go a long way before you ever have to throw it away. So I keep doing that all the way through 180, 240, 320, 400 on the dry. Each time I'm done with it, I actually wipe it off with denatured alcohol. Reason being, what happens is sometimes the denatured alcohol, just for that split second it's on there, will show you anything that maybe you can't see with your eye, like a scratch or a rub mark or something like that. And the farther along you get in your sanding, and when you do wipe it down with the denatured alcohol, it will look a little clearer. So right now you can't see a whole lot of the burl in there, but as you progress through your sanding, each time you do this, get the dust off before your next grit, you'll see more and more, you know, either imperfections, and it'll also see more and more of the burl. So I do that in each grit, wipe it off with the denatured alcohol. So like I said, I'll go through it. Once I get done with the 400, then I switch over to wet sanding. And I use the silicone carbide, I get the black sanding paper, starting at 600. I do it with water, so I just put a pan of water under the thing, and I just, same thing I'm doing with the dry. It's back and forth with the wet. Keeping it wet. Always make sure there's plenty of water on here. I'm constantly dipping the sandpaper in there, doing that. I will go through, it's sharp. So I have 600, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000. That's as high as I go. There's a lot of guys that'll go a lot higher. They go into the stuff that's called micro mesh, which will get into like 10, 15, 20,000 for a lot of resin. For these things, I just haven't seen the need. I don't really see the noticeable scratches or anything like that. To me, they're clear. So to go to the 3,000, and again, from each time I do the wet sanding, from each grit, a wet sand, I actually will then take and blow my air hose on the wood part where the water was to kind of get water out of any little nooks and crannies of the burl. Because the resin's solid, but sometimes Aussie burls are known for having some voids in them sometimes. So to get that water out of there. Then I wipe it with denatured alcohol, start my next grit. I do that all the way through, like I said, to 3,000. When it's dry, then I have to take, then I take and use Yorkshire grit. Anyway, this stuff was actually made before whoever made it before Easy Wood Tools bought them. It is actually on here, it says for resins, hybrids, and wood. It is made for, it's an ultra fine polishing compound, similar to Triple E, if you're familiar with Triple E. It's, I think it's a little bit creamier, a little bit finer grit into it than the Triple E has. So what I'll do is I'll just wipe some of this on here, and it's just like a friction polish. Wipe some on, take a paper towel. First I'll take the paper towel that I was using it, and maybe about 300 RPM, just slowly work it in, back and forth, you're trying to work it in, grip down, doing the polishing. Once you kind of get to where you start to see a shine show up on it, then I'll increase the speed, get a dry paper towel, and I really start aggressively back and forth polishing. And that's what I do for the end before I do the parting off. So that's what I'll do after all the wet sanding. Now, after I part off, and the way I part off is this, and because we don't have an air compressor, there's not a vacuum system for this. My vacuum system only works in my lathe. I use a vacuum chuck. So what I do, if I can explain it, and maybe go back and see a video on it somewhere. The vacuum chuck works through here, the vacuum, so I take this off and I keep it on, leave it on the chuck. I don't know how to do this.
Are you using the Frugal with the Frugal heads?
No, hold fast.
Okay.
Hold fast,
Including their Venturi system?
yeah. So it hooks up, you know, hook your air compressor up to it, and works that way. Now, the one thing I don't do, and I was going to explain here in a minute, is I have it so you've got a mandrel that'll screw into here, that's a term I want to think of, and will go into your tool rest, and then you'll bring it up to your vacuum chuck, turn on the vacuum, and it holds it in place, then I can take the chuck off. Then from there, I get my parting tool, and I'll take this blue block off. I'll get it as far as I can. But I do it with the support of the tailstock after I get this on here, I remove the mandrel, or the center, and then pull up my tailstock, and that'll hold the glue block, or the waste block in place while I'm doing that and turning it. I don't trust, after I take this off, I don't trust that system to hold the vacuum this tight while it spins. So all I do is it's still holding the orb after the glue block or the waste block's off. It's holding the orb in place, and I just take my drill, and I just drill the bottom nub off and flatten it. Yes?
What are you attaching the tailstock to?
So, yeah, that's I said, I wish we had a vacuum system here to show you. So, this gets put, there's a cup here that's part of the vacuum system that this will go onto. You turn the vacuum on, it sucks it in place, holds it. There's a, is it mandrel? Is that what I'm thinking, the mandrel? Okay. That you screw into here that will go in just like this, that your live center does, goes into your tailstock. Number two Morse taper. So it'd go into there, I'd bring this whole thing up to the vacuum chuck, turn the vacuum chuck on, you'd see it kind of suck in and hold it. Then I can take my chuck off, and it's holding this whole thing. Then I can put this back in, and there's the hole in the bottom. There's that hole in the bottom that I use to align it. So then I can bring that into that hole, and that holds the center, and then I can part off the block.
Does
So-
your threaded number 2 Morse taper revolve or not?
No.
No.
No, it's a dead.
It's just the one.
Right now, the more.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the.
This will, once you put it back on.
The other one.
What,
The threaded one that you.
the one threaded one, no, because all that's doing, it's just there to hold it steady so that you're bringing it up as centered as you can. Everything's in line. If I took this off and tried to put it on the vacuum chuck that way, it'll always wobble. I'll never have it
There's
set.
2 different versions, and I've got both. I was just wondering which one you had.
Oh, okay. It's the one that came with the hold fast system. So yeah, and that's just for that moment of getting the alignment, getting it in there. So then, like I said, once I part that off, I just take my drill, start out with like 100 grit on the little sanding pad, 2-inch sanding pad, get the nub off flat, and then I go through a couple grits on the bottom, do the Yorkshire grit on the bottom, and it probably takes me less time to do it that way than if I was actually turning with the vacuum, with a chisel or a gouge and stuff to do the bottom. And it is cupped, but I just sand that nub off, do a little hand sanding there, put the Yorkshire grit on there, call it good.
And when the other thing was, you had mentioned that, are you using both versions of the Yorkshire grit? 'Cause
I used to, but I have found that you really don't need to use the original, the black container. Number one, you're actually kind of going backwards, because if I went to 3,000 on the wet sanding, the original, I think they said, is like equal to like a 1,500 or something like that grit when you first put it on and work it, so you actually might impart some scratches initially with it. I just found it, I first tried using both, I got rid of the black and I just used the white, the microfine.
Check.
So.
7 to 8 minutes.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm trying to think of anything else I need to tell you. But that's, basically how I do the bottoms. I mean, it's just, it's a bottom, the way I look at it, it's a bottom. It'll be fine. Oh, thank you. Because it's sitting on there, they're not gonna see it. In that case, they have price tags on them until they get home. But,
So there's no finish on the wood part on the bottom?
other than the Yorkshire grit, no. The Yorkshire grit, I mean, it's usually got some carnauba wax and that kind of stuff into it, some other things. But it's kind of like their black, which does have carnauba wax and things like that in it. Here, hand-blended mix of mineral oil, beeswax, and microfine abrasive powders. Designed to leave a highly polished surface on resins, hybrids, and woods. So that's all it's got on it. And I mean, I have a piece, one of the first orbs I ever did, like I said, it's been like 4 years ago, sitting in our house, and my wife doesn't do anything to it other than occasionally dust it with the acrylic, like furniture. But she didn't do anything to the wood, and the wood's nice and shiny. And there is one more step I forgot to tell you about. When I'm done with the everything, and it looks like it's done, I will then, the next day, if everybody's familiar with the wheel buffing system, the 3-wheel buffing system, which has triple E, which is the red, white diamond, like a jeweler's rouge, white diamond, another kind of compound, and then the carnauba wax wheel. I will then take and just use their carnauba wax wheel as a final buffing. And even though it's pretty shiny from what I do with the Yorkshire grit at the end, that carnauba wax on the buffing wheel just seems to impart a little extra sheen to the acrylic, so I'll do that before I take it to a show. But if you don't have one, it's not totally necessary. It's just something I do. But any other questions? Appreciate you putting up with my first one.
Good job.